So I want to talk a little about dive, why it struggles, and why if we do see dive-based comps, they'll likely be different to what we're used to. So people often point to heals and sustain as the reason dive isn't played much, but really this isn't that accurate, because while sure, Moira's best heal or abilities like Mei's Ice Block are effective versus individual dive heroes, dive as a comp doesn't really care that much about them, or at least not as much as people seem to think. This is because dive isn't initially playing around a dive, it's playing around map control. You play heroes that spread out and fill the map, and then work together to contest and push out enemies that are playing away from the main team. And this does a few things. Primarily it clumps the enemy team up. The threat of these dive heroes make it really difficult for any of the enemy to split from the main group. Secondly, that allows you to take multiple angles on the enemy team. If they're clumped in a ball, you can pretty comfortably surround them for really effective poke options or good engage potential. And by that, I just mean it lets you stage really nicely for a dive. Heroes like Winston are able to get into jump range, heroes like Tracer are able to get on a good flank, and heroes like Zen have space to push into and get LOS on the dive when it goes in. And if all of that goes smoothly, heals and sustainabilities don't really mean a whole lot, as there's always going to be targets to burn down when you're taking this super clean engage, along with that ranged utility from Zen or Ana. Instead, what really hurts dive at the moment is the thing that hurts that specific playstyle, and that's the strength of range poke. Heroes like Hanzo, McCree, Bap, and Widow can put out so much range pressure that they mess up this map control default in a few ways. First, it's super difficult for heroes like Winston or Tracer to play for control, because it's super easy for those poke heroes to tag them out from range. Hanzo can use Sonic for info and his mobility to follow up on that info, and McCree or Bap can use their new rate of fire to really lock down certain angles. Range poke as a whole is super strong at the moment, and most dive heroes really can't afford to take any poke damage in pre-fight like this. You know that Winston or Tracer really sort of need to be full health before they go for a duel or an engage. This threat of taking poke while skirmishing for control means teams can't comfortably play for map control, and so don't really end up in that situation where they have multiple engage angles on a clumped enemy team. And what this means is any engage you do make is going to be pretty weak. Enemy squishies won't be forced to group together, and so are able to spread out and peel for each other from range when the dive goes in, both with heals and by focusing down the heroes making that engage, and this last bit really can't be understated. It's also worth mentioning that it's in these types of weak engages that enemy heals and sustainabilities feel overpowered versus dive. And the other thing range poke does, bearing in mind it's almost always comboed with shields, is stop dive from being able to comfortably play its own poke heroes. Historically, dive has always relied on some sort of range pressure or utility, even if it's just Zen or Ana spamming main or a Genji poking from an off angle. That early pressure plus the range utility is vital for finding engage options and being able to pull them off. But versus a poke-heavy shield comp, you can't really do that. Anyone peeking the enemy team for damage or utility will be ineffective because of their shields, and also super vulnerable because of the threat of their ranged options. And it's the strength of range poke denying these two things, the ability to skirmish for control and the ability to have your own range pressure, that means if we do see dive, it'll likely be made up of the handful of dive heroes that don't really care too much about those things. And this is where Bull fits in. He's super fast, has loads of health, and no headshot hitbox. He can afford to catch a bit of poke as he's setting up because he can farm health packs and has the adaptive shield for when he does go in. Sombra's not that bothered about poke either. She's invisible. If we do see dive versus these poke comps, it'll likely be Bull and Sombra taking space early and working together, playing for disruption and creating openings for those more vulnerable heroes like Winston and Tracer to go in on, without them having to play for map control themselves first. And with ranged LOS heroes struggling versus enemy shields and poke, the likely support picks aren't going to be heroes like Zen, Ana, or Bap. Lucio can be strong, wall riding in and popping off. Mercy's damage boost on the engage could be really good, especially comboed with a Pharah so she has a good Guardian Angel target. And Brig might be insane. The armor pack potential on Tracer and the other squishies is pretty huge. I'll talk about this type of comp and specific heroes more in depth, depending on what ends up being strong, but just to recap from a theory perspective, range poke is super strong right now. It breaks the traditional dive playstyle by poking out dive heroes playing for control, as well as stopping the dive comp from putting out its own range pressure or utility. This means dive has to use heroes like Bull and Sombra who don't care as much about the poke to create openings for the heroes like Winston and Tracer who really do care about the poke. And since the ranged LOS supports struggle versus enemy shields and range damage, supports like Lucio and Brig who aren't reliant on ranged LOS seem to be the best fit. I feel like this type of comp could be pretty effective versus those double shield poke comps we've seen recently, and I think we're going to see more and more teams trying variations of it.